African Stream is, and I quote, a pan-African digital media organization based exclusively on social media platforms, focusing on giving a voice to all Africans both at home and abroad. In reality, the only voice it gives is to Kremlin propagandists.
Just a few months after the US government smeared us, another major attack is headed our way. And just like the 2024 assault that saw us branded Kremlin propagandists by then US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the new attack follows a similar narrative. The only difference is that this one is coming from London. Leaked data has revealed a plot by the London-based Centre for Information Resilience to run a smear campaign against us and other independent media outlets and journalists. The project aims to discredit all non-Western aligned African media outlets and journalists as Russian propaganda mouthpieces. A trick that imperialism has used for centuries to discredit African revolutionaries, as Nigerian journalist David Hundeyin, who the campaign also targeted, explains.
So everybody you can think of in any kind of black liberation struggle between 1960 and 1980 was branded a Soviet communist, every single one on all sides of the Atlantic. So whether it was Fred Hampton in the US, whether it was Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, whether it was Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko, whether it was Martin Luther King, whether it was Malcolm X, everyone, W.E.B. Du Bois, everyone who had any sort of investment in Black empowerment, even if they weren't even politically active, even if they were just maybe like writers or intellectuals, everyone was branded Russian influenced. And arguably, you can even take it as relatively recently as the 1980s, where in South Africa, the apartheid government borrowed that same narrative in the 80s. The then Prime Minister, P.W. Botha, said in his famous speech that Black people are happy under apartheid, except those who have had Russian ideas pushed in between their ears.
According to the leaked documents, emails and WhatsApp conversations, CIR will coordinate the project from South Africa through Samuel Olaniran, a Nigerian journalist and academic. 30 house journalists from East, West and Southern Africa have been recruited and have undergone training sessions in Kenya, Ghana and South Africa. We have the name of at least 10 journalists participating in the project, but we won't mention them for now. They've been tasked with writing smear articles about alleged pro-Kremlin media organizations and journalists and placing them in mainstream media outlets. They're required to publish one article every 3 months, with the first batches expected before the end of March 2025. For these hit jobs, the house journos will be paid £1,000 per quarter, or just £330 per month, which shows just how little Massa values them, and also how little it costs to get African journalists to attack their compatriots on behalf of Western powers. Their modus operandi is outlined in a document labelled as Adaptive Country Plans, APR, which identifies the journalists and outlets to be targeted. African Stream has been mentioned at least 10 times, describing us as a media outlet with known ties to Russian state-backed propaganda. However, they provided zero evidence to back their claims, other than Blinken's allegations and a discredited smear piece by the US-based Stanford Internet Observatory. The only propaganda they cited was our report on the 1995 Nigerian military government's execution of 9 activists for protesting against the exploitation of the Niger Delta by Dutch oil company Shell. So let me get this straight. Does an African media outlet or independent journalist need to be paid by Vladimir Putin to report on the hangings of Africans at the behest of a European oil company? Now let's get into who CIR is and why would they come after African independent media outlets and journalists. Founded in 2020 by 2 former British Foreign Office operatives, Ross Burley and Adam Rutland, the CIR claims to be an independent counter-disinformation organisation. However, research shows that there's nothing independent about CIR. According to investigative journalist outfit Declassified UK, CIR has received at least 2.7 million since January 2021 from the UK government. The organisation has also received funding from the US State Department, USAID and the Australian Foreign Office. If you want to know someone's agenda, follow the money. CIR's connection with Western governments and intelligence agencies does not only end in its bank accounts. In addition to its two founders, several of the organisation's senior staff have past ties to Western security establishment. These include Cindy Otis, a CIA analyst for 10 years, and Matthew Lawrence, a former British military intelligence analyst. CIA's Vice President, Nino Jankovic, in 2022 was appointed to the head of the US Department of Homeland Security's so-called Disinformation Governance Board. Jankovic also worked with a Ukrainian fact-checking organisation that's been accused of whitewashing violent neo-Nazi groups. On its website, CIR denies any links to intelligence agencies or governments, stating their, quote, work speaks for itself, end quote. Indeed it does. The organisation's investigations have primarily focused on alleged crimes and human rights violations by non-Western nations or allies. So apparently, Western states like the US, UK and France have done no wrong, and their satellite apartheid state, which has committed genocide in Gaza, has also done nothing worth investigating. Interesting. The media outlets and journalists that CIR has targeted are mostly those that have critically reported on the activities of Western corporations like Shell and the West's genetically modified food agenda and what they describe as, quote, the Dangote refinery controversy. So, is our work messing their money up? We know this attack will not be the last, but it will not deter us from telling our African stories from an anti-imperialist, pan-African perspective. Since these attacks originated in the US, let's end with a quote by one of their own. I ask you to judge us by the enemies we've made.